the West. So rather than the other way around. And then I've just got one more quote from the Quran. And we have made the night and the day two signs. Then we have made the sign of the night to pass away. And we have made the sign of the day manifest, so that you may seek grace from your Lord, and that you may know the numbering of years and the reckoning. And we have explained everything with distinctness. So here the sun and the moon can be used to measure time. The hours of the day marked by the sun's passing at its sunrise and sunset. And of course, the lunar calendar and the different phases of the moon indicating different times. So it would seem quite clear, the Quranic perspective, certainly from my reading of those passages, certainly seems to be geocentric. And I would find it very hard to read it otherwise, particularly. I think when it comes to the biblical passages, I personally tend to view some of them of leaning towards more geocentric, and some of them seem to be a little more debatable, perhaps. But then certainly within our language, linguistically, we tend to use language that reflects that. In common speak, we'll say, rising with the sun. Never let the sun go down on your anger. He thinks the sun rises and sets on her. So our everyday language, seems to refer to the movement of the sun and that. So it's definitely something that... So I'm going to come on now to why I think personally it could be credible. I'm not absolutely sure, but the reasons that I believe is possibly credible that geocentric could be something that actually is real and true. So the first thing is the North Star, I think. And the North Star is the one fixed star you see, sometimes referred to as Polaris. You see it as, if you look up in the sky, of course, you'll see it in the same position all the time, never moves. And I think if you have the Earth there, it's directly above it. So hence the name, it's that it's anchored directly above the North Pole. So if the Earth is moving and that, why isn't the star moving? I suppose that's one question. Other stars do move, but this one, the North Star Polaris, is a fixed one. And that brings me on to stellar parallax, I think it's pronounced. I mean, my understanding is very weak, to confess to you. I got a D in science at school, so, but nevertheless, I'm able to sort of like reasonably understand logical ideas, but beyond a certain point, when it becomes complicated, it may become harder. But my understanding of parallax is where the apparent change in position of an object due to a location in an observable location. So one example of that would be if you look at something with one eye shut. I'm looking at a camera now, and if you look at it with the other eye shut, it seems to move slightly because I'm looking at it from here and then from there. So if I'm moving where I'm looking at something, you would think that the thing itself would move because my position of reference has changed. So ancient Greeks believed that if the Earth was moving around the sun, then the stars would shift their positions due to this orbital motion. And I happen to agree with them. So, and I think, that's sort of my scientific understanding, which is very limited, admittedly. However, Aristotle and a great many other ancient Greeks, and indeed some, albeit a minority of modern scientists today, their scientific understanding is not limited in any way. I understand that there is certainly a tremendous argument between different scientists, and that I am not properly qualified to be the right person to be having that argument. But I nevertheless, as we all do, will use my limited skills to assess which scientists seem more credible and who seems to be giving the more reliable accounts. So I see the North Star Polaris and also Stellar Parallax as actually big good evidence for a stationary Earth. There are, of course, many other scientists and mainstream scientists who have great counter arguments, no doubt, and I'm sure they do. I don't know the extent of those, but it certainly will be something I'll look into more. But my other third argument is really if the Earth was truly spinning, then we would feel something. Surely, if you're on a motorbike and you're travelling at a vast distance, you feel the wind's turbulence, right? Certainly, if you stuck your head out of an aeroplane window, that's a lot faster, and you'd feel the wind turbulence so much more if it doesn't take your head off or suck you out the window or something. You know, the power and the thrust of that wind force, it would just be so incredible. To say you wouldn't feel it would be a joke, wouldn't it, really? You know, it would be such a hard thrust that it will be something, you know, something that you are bound to feel, right? So why, if the Earth is spinning at an incredible pace, right, particularly on the equator where it's meant to be spinning faster, right? The Earth is meant to be spinning around the sun, okay? But the theory goes more than that. Also that the Earth is spinning around the sun and the sun itself is spinning around the centre of the galaxy. Indeed, right? We've got here the Earth's equator allegedly going at the speed of 1,000 miles per hour. This is what I've read, and I think that's accurate. And then additionally, the whole solar system that the Earth is within is said to be travelling at 514,000 miles per hour. You know, just mind-boggling speeds that would make an aeroplane seem like it was a snail, you know, and yet an aeroplane, you know, we would feel the wind turbulence as being something that would. So why, if the Earth is spinning so fast and the whole solar system it's within is spinning, why don't anybody ever experience or feel any of that? We don't feel any wind motion or thrust. Why does everything stay quite calmly in its place? Nothing gets swept away, and surely the buildings would be ripped apart, and you know, with that kind of like velocity and with that sort of energy being, you know, just look at the damage that hurricanes and tsunamis do, and they're only travelling a minute amount of force and speed, you know, compared to the Earth's alleged speed, right? So, but the counter argument that people give to that is that the whole atmosphere. So that's So that this is a slightly different argument now. You know, argument 4 for me is if the Earth's spinning, right? Instead of sending an aeroplane from this point to fly over to this point, right? We just get an aeroplane to hover here and wait for the Earth to just sort of rotate around. Save a lot of petrol, wouldn't it, I suppose? And then you could just sort of hover up, the Earth travels round, and then you lower down again. So air traffic controllers never use anything, they never take into account any movement of the Earth, never. It's not something that any pilots ever use when navigating planes. So it's just not something that's ever considered. The counter argument for that, of course, what they say coming back to that is that the atmosphere surrounding the Earth is moving too. So that when the aeroplane is flying over the Earth, it's moving in an atmosphere that's moving along with the Earth too. So that's probably why. Okay, but then you can extend the argument to that. Okay, so here, what about the satellite then? So the satellite, that's outside the atmosphere, right? But that's not being moved around by the Earth, is it? That's having to move itself, isn't it? And so, I mean, depends. Where does the atmosphere end? At what points? I just don't see that. I don't see that. If you look at spacecraft and that on the outer edges, they are not sort of like how if the Earth was spinning and that, we would have good footage of that as well. But equally, they wouldn't need to be travelling, would they? They wouldn't need to use any fuel, surely, if they were sort of going around and that. So, it would be nice if you could just have an air flight, couldn't you, really? If the Earth was spinning, you could just have an air flight up to outside the atmosphere. So as long as you could allow someone to live in those conditions, because there have been people in space, allegedly, and so, that would prove it, wouldn't it? So you could have people up in space, wait for the Earth to turn and then just sort of descend again. So, I mean, I'm sure some people would find it all quite laughable, really. The strange thing is that I find it laughable almost to believe in heliocentric beliefs, really. But equally, I think many people find my belief in it quite laughable. But I think we have to be careful how we describe other people's beliefs, and to be cautious not to ridicule or humiliate other people. When I was researching this, I think what surprised me is how that heliocentric is so accepted as the norm today, is so prevalent that even the people that dare to even think of geocentric views or to even ask questions about it are not by everyone, but by some people are just mocked and ridiculed. I heard and read people in forums being described as retards, as backwards, as stupid, as childish, as all these kind of, as imbeciles. I've seen all sorts of horrible quotes and that. And it's like somebody can have a really different view to you in life without you having to be insulting and degrading, right? There's that old saying, play the ball, not the player. You don't have to degenerate down to an insulting level and that. Even though you may find someone's view to be ridiculous and you may find it funny, in fact, and stupid. But, you've got to sort of assess and look at people have got different capacities and that. I didn't spend years studying science. It's not my area. I've looked at other things and that. So I can't profess to know. And yet, nevertheless, I do still have a scientific belief in it without all the credentials, because everybody has a belief on all things anyway. And you still have a belief on how worthy a piece of artwork is, right? That you're still entitled to have some view on it. It's not going to be, you could still say, I'm not, I may be wrong in that, and that's how I'm gonna say to you. But I'm not going to go to an art gallery and say, I haven't got an art degree, so therefore I'm going to look at a piece of abstract art and say nothing. I'm still going to give you my thoughts on it, but I'll say, yeah, my thoughts might not be as valid as some of us who have taken more time to study those things, But nevertheless, just because someone studied something, people have studied things and been very wrong as well, Like if you study something that's wrong and you're indoctrinated under that system, it's actually kind of harder to get out of that, whatever field of study you're in. On the other hand, people that have studied things that are right are more knowledgeable, and they do have more accurate findings. So I suppose that's that's probably the reason, isn't it? Really, why I'm not too sure to enter into this, but I still think it's important to consider it. I'm entertaining the thought of geocentrics. I'm a sort of I wouldn't say I'm a hardcore believer, because I haven't got to a position where I could say I have thoroughly researched all of the facts. I am absolutely, totally sure of them without any doubt. But I have got reasonable doubt in the heliocentric model, and my gut feeling says geocentric. I suppose that's as far as I can sort of go, really. And why would it be? Why would it be, of course, that so many people believe in heliocentrism? Why has it become such a prominent belief over the years? Well, I think there's several reasons why it's become so popular. I suppose if you're surrounded by lots of other people that all tend to think that. It's like the snowball effect. The more, once something is really popular, there's that safety in numbers idea, isn't there? So, and that's often right. If lots of people think something, is often for good reason, but not always. Sometimes the majority can be wrong. That's why I'm not completely. I don't think democracy has the answers to everything. I think there's some good in democracy, but there's limits to democracy as well. So populism could be one reason why some people choose to go to heliocentrism. My own reason for going to that is A, because I didn't see it as that important at the time. I didn't see that it related to my theology, my philosophy, psychology of life, and that all things are related, really. I didn't see it as I sort of divided things up back then into little separate boxes, really. So I didn't see it as that important, and I didn't really question it that deeply at the time. It's just not something I thought of. And I assume it's like that probably for most people. Most people just, you accept what the majority view is around you just because it's something that you haven't taken time because you haven't needed to, perhaps. So, and there's another thing where geocentric views are sometimes mistakenly put in with flat earth beliefs. And this is another thing and I find flat earth just absolutely ridiculous. And I do find stupid. I don't know, I certainly wouldn't mock or laugh at the people that have those, and they're entitled to those beliefs. But I find it just sheer stupidity. Just because I, with my limited capacity, can still function and realise, wait, the sun rises here, it goes in a sort of half circle and sets there, then disappears for half the time. It's not a mystery that takes that long to work out, is it, really? That it's doing, it's just complete the other half of the circle. It's kind of, it's sort of like a deduction challenge, that, isn't it, really? And I think most people can easily work out from the sun's orbit or, the sun's alleged orbit, that the Earth is indeed a sphere, as Aristotle said, or a globe. And, I just think it's so obvious the Earth is a globe, and it just seems ridiculous to me that people think that. But then people find what I'm saying ridiculous too. But it has to be noted that many flat earthers do believe in geocentric views. That is true, but there are many people who believe in geocentric views who do not believe in flat earth. So the two views are mutually exclusive. Then you can believe in one but not the other. And I believe in geocentric, but I think the flat earth thing is just totally ridiculous. But you'll find a lot of videos on YouTube and a lot of websites and a lot of books that seem to put together flat earth and geocentric view. And there are lots of people that have those views together, but there are lots of people who don't believe in flat earth. And just like I agree with most heliocentric viewpointers, or even people that haven't thought about it that much, that a flat earth is just a ridiculous notion. And I'd sooner believe in an elephant on the back of a monkey on a turtle swimming in a river, with the earth being balanced on the monkey's shoulder. But yeah, so I think there's another reason that too many people equate it with flat earth, where it doesn't have to be, and it's not one and the same thing. They're separate ideas, although some flat earthers relate them, others don't. So I think there's also this fear, perhaps, about some people of being ridiculed and laughed at and called names, sure. And I had that, certainly, and I think that's led to a long delay in posting this as well. And certainly the few people that I've encountered where I have openly talked about it, I have received some very weird responses sometimes, just because it's geocentric views are such an institutionalized normal thing where so many people believe them, and it's something that it totally turns your world sort of upside down in terms of perspective, right? It's so I was getting on with this guy really well at this house where we were living together. we were becoming acquainted, we were friendly, he was cooking dinner for me, we got on well, and during the course of having dinner, I happened to let slip my beliefs at this moment, and why I thought the sun travels around the earth, why I believed in geocentric, still do. And he, at that moment, got so weirded out, and that was sort of, it was very awkward, and that was sort of the end of our discussion, really. And he cancelled our trip to the garden centre that we were planning on going to, so that was a bit annoying. I think he just I think he just thought, like, with weird views like that, what other weirdness will sort of like creep out during the rest of the day. So I think that was kind of he got a bit weirded out by that. The few other occasions that I've sort of like openly said that I believe this, other people have refuted it, and they've given good scientific reasons. And I say good scientific reasons. It always sounds good, but I never quite understand. You know, it's really long-winded, really complex terms, and really complex ideas. And I kind of think, do they even understand what they're saying? And I'm not really, and I certainly don't enough to sort of discuss it. And for me to understand that would take a huge investment of time. You know, not just hours. It would take days and weeks of studying to find out what it's all about properly. And I suppose to debate the issue thoroughly scientifically to a reasonably high standard is something I think I'd like to do more, because I'm not totally convinced, but I have got reasonable grounds, and I think a lot of other people have too. And the interesting thing is that everybody, pretty much, the evidence when you're a child is that the sun seems to sort of like, the sun seems to appear here, travel over here, and then end there. And that does seem to be the evidence. So pretty much, you know, in terms of stellar parallax, in terms of the North Star, in terms of the lack of wind turbulence, in terms of the travel around the Earth and flight navigation, and you know, in terms of the visible evidence, what appears as so intuitive. And, you know, children do tend to believe that until they're educated out of it, until they're taught, you know, all these scientific doctrines and that. And my doubt about it all, I suppose, is as well the psychology of it, that people have a tendency sometimes to believe in things because it seems like it's authoritative and legitimate. And I know I study psychology, so I am quite aware of Stanley Milgram's study of conformity, you know, and like people are more likely to do something if a man who appears authoritatively and speaks firmly and dressed in a white professional coat and looks the part and says things in a formal way that sound authoritative to you know, and has the right sounding jargon and that. And people are much more likely to follow unquestioningly someone like that. And, you know, I learned in, quite surprisingly, the conformity studies. There was Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiments. And there was also Stanley Milgram's study where people gave electric shocks to each other, shockingly. They weren't real shocks, of course. They were just actors pretending, but it appeared to the people that they were real. And it's surprising just how many of the participants, you know, 65% of them gave up to 450 volts, which would be lethal if it was actually real, you know. And so Milgram was able to show as a result of that, that many people, you know, are likely to give a potential shock just because a doctor who came with a clipboard and white coat told them it was safe to do so, when of course their own common sense should have told them otherwise. So there's this thing, isn't there? And he goes on to reflect about this experiment in his discussion, The Perils of Obedience, 1974. The legal and philosophic aspects of obedience are of enormous importance, but they say very little of how people behave in concrete situations. So really, of course, his experiments, they weren't real world situations. So, we can't be totally sure. But he does go on to say the extreme willingness of adults to go to almost any length on the command of an authority consists of the chief finding of the study, and this fact most urgently demands explanation. So it could well be, and this study is relevant, I think, because it involves trusting the scientific community. In his study, it was trusting a scientific authority figure to believe something that was actually counterintuitive. We know too many electric shocks cause someone to get hurt, right? Just because someone who seems authoritative says otherwise doesn't mean anything, right? Milgram suggests two things for a person to act in this manner, right? That the person giving the orders is perceived as being qualified to direct other people's behaviours so that they are seen as legitimate. Okay, and the person being ordered is able to believe that this authority will accept responsibility. Well, of course, we know that's not the case, isn't it? Many times, but I just wonder whether it is sometimes our desire to conform, not just to the majority and what other people do, but to an expert and to someone that appears qualified. If you had an art expert telling you this abstract picture is just a wonderful show of the post-humans triumph over blah 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 or whatever, and then you gave it all this praise, and I all said, oh yeah, I can see that actually, or and actually it was just a little pseudo baffle, and really it was just like, I don't know, some elephant had just like painted a load of rubbish, or just a kid. But how many people would actually believe that? Because somebody has, and that has happened actually, of course. There have been people that I've heard about that, where they put fake art journals, but they've used it in really artistic language that sounds like it's really interesting and exotic, and it's done in such a way that we don't want to question it, because we know we're not really qualified. We're not art experts. We haven't got the time to have invested years and years and years studying something. So, even if but what if it does go against something that seems counterintuitive, that seems like common sense? And I would say that geocentric view seems like common sense to me. It seems like the most common sense position. And I would say you would accept that as the right position unless you saw good evidence to say otherwise, and the burden of proof should be on those trying to prove something that isn't intuitive and commonsensical. So that's why I take geocentric as my view. But so I've got my 6 reasons, I think they were there, or 7 perhaps. So I think there's many reasons why lots of people don't agree with that, and I can totally understand that, and I certainly understand many people probably haven't taken time to look at it and consider it, or they don't feel qualified enough to. And maybe if we don't feel qualified, maybe our actual correct scientific position should be an agnostic one. I don't know, maybe I should say in the art gallery, I don't know if that's an interesting, abstract, conceptual piece, or if that's just a load of rubbish. Because I haven't studied art. It's not something that I know enough about, and I'm going to remain agnostic on this. Just maybe the position of the majority, and me, maybe that should be our position. Maybe we should say, I don't know. I haven't trained as a physicist, an astronomer, or mathematician. I haven't spent months and years or decades studying those things, so I'm not qualified to know. And I'm not just going to make an unassumed, unqualified assumption just because lots of other people say it, or just because some expert says that, when there's some art experts say this and some art experts say that, some scientists say this and some scientists say the opposite. So if I'm not qualified, maybe I should become more agnostic in things that I really don't know about. So maybe I've sort of argued myself into an agnostic position after all, and not knowing. My intention, though, just to end that, is actually to perhaps do a short study on this and to find out what other people think about it. And I'll do that by doing a questionnaire and asking other people what their beliefs are, why they believe those things, and also to find out what they think about other people that have geocentric views. You know, do you think that they're led by religious beliefs? Do you think that they're just weirdos? Do you think that they are just non-conformists, or they just want to be different? Or do you think that they might have a good point, or that they're just childish, or why do people think these things? So I'll be doing a bit of questionnaering and finding out, and I'll do sort of a report on that when I find out more, because I think that'll be interesting. But I wanted to give a full account of my geocentric beliefs. I guess I'm a sort of agnostic believer, really. I'm a sort of like between being agnostic and believing geocentric, really. But maybe during the course of the questionnaring and finding out what other people think, maybe I'll change my view. And I'm open to, if I find out things that I can understand that challenge my views. So certainly we'll look into that.